Hi, I wanted to talk today about the great writer Ivan Turgenev, who is a favorite of mine, and he's especially a favorite of mine as a writer of horror stories. And I wanted to talk about him first because I almost never see him mentioned as a writer of great horror stories, but I think he is. And I was pleased to find out that I'm not the only one that thinks that. I'm reading in this collection of short stories by Guy de Maupassant. It's called The Dark Side of Guy de Maupassant. And what's great about it for horror fans like me is that it gathers up just the horror stories. It doesn't have all the horror stories, but it also doesn't have other kinds of stories in here. Uh, Maupassant is great at other kinds of stories too, but come on, I want a horror story. Anyway, the point is that Maupassant puts over Turgenev as the greatest of all the horror writers. So I want to read a brief passage about that. This is Guy de Maupassant. He says this great Russian novelist Turgenev has no equal when it comes to being able to thrill the reader with a shudder from the veiled unknown. In the twilight atmosphere of some strange story, he can give us a glimpse into a whole world of disturbing, mysterious, ominous things. In his stories, you can really feel that vague fear of the invisible. The fear of something strange behind a wall, behind a door, something lurking beneath the visible world. In his writing, he suddenly sheds upon us an uncertain gleam of light, but only sufficient of it to increase our sense of dread. Sometimes Turgenev seems to show us that there is a meaning behind curious coincidences, an unexpected connection between circumstances which appear to be due to chance, and yet which are controlled by a hidden, sinister force. He shares with us the feeling that there is an imperceptible thread mysteriously guiding us through life, rather like being guided through some hazy dream whose meaning constantly escapes us. He never rushes boldly into descriptions of the supernatural, like Edgar Allan Poe or Hoffman. He tells us straightforward stories in which there is just the hint of something mysterious and disturbing. Um, Somebody should probably jump in there and defend Edgar Allan Poe and Hoffman because I think they got dissed a little bit there. But we'll do that another day. Maupassant goes on to tell this story that he says Turgenev told him personally. And it's about when Turgenev was a young man and went swimming in a creek in a rural area. And as he was swimming, someone tapped him on the shoulder. He looked back, and what he saw looked like a cross between a woman and a she-ape, says Maupassant. And she was so terrifying that he swam for his life, but she swam faster. He got out, and without even trying to pick up his gun that he had been carrying along to hunt, or even his clothes, he ran through the woods, and this strange creature pursued him. He was terrified, and finally he got to a place where a child who was looking after some goats came to the rescue. He was holding a whip, and with it he began to hit the fearsome human freak, which ran away howling with pain, and Turgenev saw it disappearing into the foliage, looking like a female gorilla. It was, in fact, a crazy old woman who had lived in this wood for more than 30 years, living on foods provided by the kindness of the herdsmen, and spending half her time swimming in the river. Well, there's the story that supposedly Turgenev told to young Maupassant. I don't believe it for a minute because honestly it sounds more like a Maupassant story than a Turgenev one. Um, Maupassant mentions that he is not sure whether Turgenev ever put that into his own writing, and I'm not sure either, but I've never come across it anyway. Why would Maupassant say such a thing if it wasn't true? Well, hey, it's a good story. But also, this story of Maupassant's was published the year after Turgenev died, and so I sort of suspect that this was just his macabre way of paying tribute to his old mentor who had only recently died. Okay, anyway, I think Turgenev is a great writer of horror stories, as I said. My very favorite is a story called The Dream, which you can find out there on the internet. Maybe we'll talk about that separately someday. But he has at least half a dozen more that I think are terrific stories that are horrific or speculative in some way. And also within his prose poems, there's some creepy ones. I've done a reading of one called The Skull, which I did a fresh translation of, and you'll find that elsewhere on this channel. The best volume to look at for Turgenev's horror stories is called Dream Tales and Prose Poems, and within that you'll find that great story, The Dream, as well as a terrific one called The Song of Everlasting Love. Okay, hope that was interesting for you. It was interesting for me.